Greetings, vinyl community. It's been a couple of months now since I've done a new acquisitions video, and although I had been planning not to make a lot of new acquisitions since I was preparing for a move, I do have a lot to show, so I'm going to go through things a bit quickly. I want to thank everybody who expressed sympathy and concern for my housing situation. Without going into detail, the eviction as originally served is off. So I expect it will be coming back, but for now the situation is uncertain, but I get to stay put for the time being. I want to start off the music portion with music of Bach. This is 3 organ concerti after Vivaldi. So the music of Vivaldi as arranged by Bach for solo organ, played by Robert Noren. And this was recorded in the late 50s for the Urania label. This is a later edition, and it's one that I originally picked up around 73, 74, thereabouts. There are 3 concertos, or concerti, performed. The number 2 in A minor, number 5 in D minor, and number 3 in C major. Interesting trivia about the D minor concerto is that one of Bach's many sons, we know that Bach had 20 children because he had no stops on his organ, Wilhelm Friedemann Bach claimed credit for the concerto in D minor. And that's interesting because the manuscript exists that would have been written when Wilhelm Friedemann was 6 years old. So we don't think he was quite that precocious. And this is on the Urania label, which is very trippy when you see it revolving. It's kind of like a low-budget version of the Vertigo swirl. Next, some electronic music from the early 60s on the Columbia label. Music by John Cage, the Variations 2, taking up side 1 of the LP. Cage I think of as more a philosopher than a composer. He writes compositions that are geared towards making us into philosophers because they make us question the nature of the music and is it really music? They could make us ask questions about the nature of sound. This one is music for electronically altered piano, and it's not my favorite thing on the album. I prefer side 2, which is music of Milton Babbitt, ensembles for synthesizer, and Henri Pousseur, Trois Visages de Liège, which is electronic music combined with choral voices. Very cool stuff, and this is on the old gray Columbia Masterworks label. Compositions from circa 1961. Moving on to the jazz world, a 1987 recording by the Anthony Braxton Quartet, If My Memory Serves Me Right, with Braxton on reeds, David Rosenboom on piano, Mark Dresser on bass, and Jerry Hemingway throwing his drum kit down the stairs. An ECM album that I was convinced I already had on vinyl, but did not. So I picked up a copy of Crystal Silence by Chick Corea and Gary Burton. Well-titled piece, well-covered piece. The serenity of the cover image really matches the music, although my favorite track on here is Signore Mouse, the same tune that was done by Return to Forever as Captain Signore Mouse, done here just with piano and vibraharp, and it's just a wonderful little Latin-inflected tune, very peppy, very sweet. And this is from 1973, recorded in 1972. The 1979 release by Ornette Coleman, Soap Suds, Soap Suds. This is an album of duets with Charlie Hayden on bass, and Ornette playing tenor sax and trumpet. Gatefold cover containing a booklet insert with a musical score of the track Sex Spy and an Ornette Coleman discography. The title Soap Suds, Soap Suds, well, there's one track called Soap Suds, and the soap seems to refer to the soap opera spoof Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman, which aired in the 1970s. And the first track on here is Ornette and Charlie Hayden's take on the theme from the TV show Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. A brand new issue from the Honest John's Records label, which features a lot of music from the British free jazz scene. This is in 1981, if you couldn't guess, recording from the Ad Hoc Ensemble Company. And Company, in this case, consists of two different lineups featuring Derek Bailey on guitar, Tristan Hansinger on cello, Christine Jeffrey on voice, Toshinori Kondo on trumpet, Charlie Morrow on trumpet, voice, and horn, David Toop on flute, bells, and small instruments. That's one of the ensembles. The other is Martin Altina on bass, Derek Bailey on guitar, Georgie Bourne on cello, and Lindsay Cooper on bassoon, both from the Henry Cow fame. Steve Lacey on soprano sax, Radu Malfatti on trombone, and Jamie Muir on percussion. Jamie Muir, of course, was briefly a member of King Crimson, and there is not a lot of his music on record, so this is a very welcome addition to that small discography. Nice inner sleeves, artist pictures on the labels themselves. Nice, nicely textured covers, so it's just a really beautiful package. One of the first releases by John Coltrane for Impulse, live at the Village Vanguard. Very much a classic recording with Eric Dolphy joining the quartet. Not quite the classic quartet, it still has Reggie Workman before Jimmy Garrison joined up. Eric Dolphy is included on the track Spiritual, and Softly as in a Morning Sunrise and the sidelong Chasin' the Train complete the album. This is not an original on the Orange label, this is the Red Ring label from the late 60s with the New York address. And another John Coltrane album, the posthumous release Infinity from the 70s. This is a controversial item in the Coltrane catalog because it consists of two recordings by the classic quartet from 1965 and two recordings from 1966 with Alice Coltrane, Rashid Ali, and Pharoah Sanders on one of them. But Alice has overdubbed herself on the classic quartet parts where she's added her own harp and replaced her original piano parts on the parts that she originally played, or the tracks that she originally played on, and added strings to everything. So it's got a very unique sound, completely unlike any other John Coltrane release. The string parts somehow remind me of the music of Alan Hovhaness. And a bit of trivia is that among the violin players are Michael White and Gordon Maron, who was the violinist in the United States of America. And the music also has an added Eastern flavor with the use of tambura among the overdubs. So while Coltrane was approaching that to some extent during his lifetime. This takes it much farther than he ever did himself. John Handy Quintet, New View. This features Bobby Hutcherson on vibes and Pat Martino on guitar, live recording, and continuing the John Coltrane thread, does start off with a cover of Naima. Blue Note reissue, Joe Henderson Mode for Joe, with Lee Morgan on trumpet, Curtis Fuller on trombone, Joe Henderson tenor sax, Bobby Hutcherson vibes, Cedar Walton on piano, Ron Carter on bass, and Joe Chambers on drums. And that speaks for itself. A big favorite of mine, Charles Mingus, Mingus in Europe. And this is a live recording from the 1964 tour with Eric Dolphy, shortly before Dolphy's tragically premature passing. Eric Dolphy on flute and bass clarinet, Clifford Jordan on tenor, Jackie Bayard on piano, Mingus on bass, and Danny Richmond on drums. This was recorded in Wuppertal, Germany, after the trumpet player who completed the sextet had dropped out due to a sudden illness. And this is actually volume 1 of 2 volumes that were released, and is a particular favorite because it consists almost entirely of an extended performance of my all-time favorite Mingus composition, Fables of Faubus, which takes up all of side 1 and most of side 2. The last 7 minutes of side 2 being taken up with Starting, attributed to Eric Dolphy, which is a duet between Dolphy on flute and Charles Mingus on bass. That's an improv based on I Can't Get Started, the well-known standard. Dolphy is featured on the cover, on the back, playing the alto, which he doesn't play on the album because he's featured on bass clarinet for Fables of Faubus. Swedish sort of ethnic fusion ensemble Rena Rama, featuring Lennon Auberg on saxophones and percussion, Bobo Stenson on piano, Paula Danielson on bass, and Leroy Lowe on drums and percussion. This is on the Jappo label, recorded in 1977. Really nice stuff. Going back to 1961, released in 1963, Shirley Scott's Satin Doll. This is a follow-up to her previous album of Duke Ellington compositions, and it repeats Sea Jam Blues, which was on that one, but also includes the title track, Satin Doll, a version of It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing that is interestingly taken at a very relaxed tempo, very different from the usual approach to that tune. Perdido, Mood Indigo, Things Ain't What They Used to Be, and Solitude. And this is an original 1963 Deep Groove Prestige pressing. And also by Shirley Scott, Workin'. Recorded around the same time as the previous album, but not released until 1967. And this is a later pressing on the Trident Prestige label, the Blue Trident Prestige label. And this features her versions of Autumn Leaves and Slaughter on 10th Avenue and Work Song, among others. George Duvivier and George Tucker on bass, Arthur Edgehill on drums, Roy Haynes on drums, Ronell Bright on piano, Wally Richardson guitar, Peck Morrison bass. So obviously not all at once. These are from various sessions in the late 50s or early 60s. Another big favorite of mine. This is just an upgrade copy of the furious, fiery Dark to Themselves by the Cecil Taylor Unit, with Rafe Malik on trumpet, James Lyons on alto, David S. Ware on tenor, and Mark Edwards on drums. It was recorded in 1976, a live recording from Ljubljana, what was then Yugoslavia, and released on the Inner City label in 1977. And rounding out the jazz section, two albums from my earliest days of learning to appreciate jazz. One was McCoy Tyner, Song of the New World, and this was one of my first jazz albums that I'd ever owned because I heard his version of Afro Blue on the radio and had to track that down. So great. This is a big band date with, among others, Cecil Bridgewater, John Faddis, and Virgil Jones on trumpets, Julius Watkins, Willie Ruff, William Warnick III on French horns, Hubert Laws on flute, Sonny Fortune on flute and sax, Alphonse Mouzon on drums, and as I said, various others. It's a large ensemble. And on the fusion side, again, one of the first jazz albums I ever owned, Mika Urbaniak, Fusion 3, featuring the amazing echo-plexed wordless vocals of his then-wife Ursula Dudziak. And you've got Anthony Jackson on bass, John Abercrombie on guitar, and Larry Coryell on guitar, among others, for this. A reissue of Faust 4 by the German krautrock band Faust, and this is the album that really enshrined the term krautrock, as that is the name of the first track. And this reissue comes with an interesting inner sleeve with notes and reproduction of a kind of promo poster from back in the day. This is my favorite of Faust's albums, and it's really varied because it switches between stuff that's very grungy and dark and abstract to stuff that's very quirky and poppy and melodic. The Sad Skinhead, the second track in particular, is just a really wacky, catchy tune with bizarre sounds popping in and out, and a beat that starts and stops. And other tracks like that, Geeky Smile is another peppy little catchy number. It's a Bit of a Pain is a soft ballad with extremely nasty electronic guitar sounds. Very interesting, great album. Also on Virgin, Q Roan, terrific album by John Greaves and Peter Blegvad, formerly of the combined Henry Cow Slap Happy unit. And this includes contributions by Carla Bley and Michael Mantler, and is very much in the vein of their music. If you appreciate that, you would appreciate this. Really interesting conceptual ideas behind it. There are cartoons here with clues to the titles and lyrics, which are based on the piece of art that's reproduced on the cover. There's amazing wordplay with anagrams and spelling jokes and palindromes, such as Peel's foe, not a set animal, laminates a tone of sleep. From France, Mona Lisa, the first album, L'Escapade, and this is very much in the same vein as Ange, Big favorite of mine from the French progressive rock scene. So if you dig them, you dig this. Very much the kind of Genesis / Van der Graaf Generator influenced side of prog rock, with a very Gallic sensibility to it. A brand new reissue on the Wah Wah label of Anthony Moore. I should have shown this right next to the Greaves and Blegvad album, because Anthony Moore is also from Slap Happy and the Henry Cow Slap Happy merger. Pieces from the Cloudland Ballroom. Minimalist music, very repetitious. I try to say repetitious and repetitive at the same time and end up saying patithia. On the Wah Wah label, with an insert, with a special Wah Wah inner sleeve. Another new reissue, Illuminations by Buffy Sainte-Marie. This is the Record Store Day issue on yellow vinyl. And this is an extraordinarily experimental album for Buffy Sainte-Marie. There's a lot of electronic work going on here, particularly on the amazing opening track, God is Alive, Magic is Afoot, which is Buffy Sainte-Marie's setting of Poetry by Leonard Cohen. And then on the completely electronic tip, Klaus Schulze, soundtrack to the movie Body Love, 1977 release on the Metronome label. And from the cover, which features a lot of folks who forgot to put their clothes on, I had the impression that this was maybe a kind of European art movie, which happened to include a lot of nudity. Years later, I actually stumbled across the movie itself on DVD, and it turns out to be a flat-out porno. And I was really kind of surprised by that, because this is original music from the film by Lasse Brown. He's credited like he's some great auteur, filmmaker, and you don't expect to see that on a flat-out porno movie. That's what it is. So you do get Klaus Schulze's music in the movie, and there's in particular an orgy scene that kind of just goes on forever. And that's where they make use of something like a sidelong track of Klaus Schulze's electronic music. And for something completely different, this was one of the first albums I ever owned, and picking it up was basically a mistake because it's just silly. It's the Surrey Brass, made in the 60s, and I think my copy had this exact same price sticker on it, so that's why I've left the shrink wrap on. This is just big band recordings of songs like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, Stop in the Name of Love, Ferry Cross the Mersey, Whipped Cream, Help Me Rhonda, Game of Love, The Last Time, and a few songs that for some reason are not listed on either the cover or the labels. They do I Want to Hold Your Hand, Downtown, and Do the Freddy, none of which is listed. So I'm not sure what that's about. And this album, I had never seen another copy after the one that I had 50 years ago. And for years, I tried to remember. I wasn't even sure of the title. It didn't have a Discogs listing until relatively recently. It did eventually turn up, and this is the only other copy I've ever seen, besides the one that I had when I was a kid and got duped into spending 44 cents on it. Thierry Zabwatsev, bass player for the brilliant Avant Chamber Prague ensemble Art Zoid. His first solo recording from the early 80s, I think, 1979, 1980, I'm not sure, maybe a bit later than that. Prometheus, or Prométhée. And this is on the Cryonic label. Really great stuff. Very much in the Zool vein, or RIO vein. This one I just cracked the shrink wrap specifically for the video. I haven't even played this one yet. This is the recent reissue of Frank Zappa's Orchestral Favorites in a fancy gatefold sleeve with a booklet insert and heavy pressing on the Zappa Records label. And this is the original album as it was originally packaged. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Be well, and talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.